Hello, and welcome to Esoterica and Nonsense, a podcast where we discuss myths, legends, folk tales, fairy tales, supernatural phenomenon, and religions from around the world. I am your host, Banana Bell, and I am reporting during a little storm. I wish, now that I figured out how to use my mic, I'm sure you can't hear the rain, but it is so beautiful. It's raining. And this is your PSA. Wherever you are, whatever you're doing, stop and make yourself some tea because we're going to get into tea today. We're going to talk all about tea. If you're watching my video format on my YouTube, I have this little I Ching pot here. How cute is this? And my one of my best friends, Nico, gave it to me. It's like a little I Ching pot. This is made for teas that need a higher temperature, specifically things like pu'er. And just listen to this. I'm gonna do some ASMR. I'm gonna put the lid back in perfectly. Did you hear that? I don't know. I hope you did. This is your chance to make some tea. I love tea. Tea is so magical. And as someone who grew up in the United States, I think there's a big misconception and lack of education about tea. And so we're going to get into it. We're going to get into all the details. We're going to talk about the history. We're going to talk about the lore. We're going to talk about the deities. We have so much to cover. We have so much to do. So let's get right into it, my dear sweet pepper pot pie. So let's right off the bat get something incredibly clear. In the Western world, I should say, we use the term tea very liberally. We have tea and then herbal tea, right? That's like what we say in English. I just want to establish right off the bat that herbal tea is not tea at all. And I understand we don't really have a proper term for it. So I'm going to give everyone a little bit of leeway here. But I have spent a lot of time and have worked at a tea shop. Shout out to Blue Willow in Berkeley, California. Highly recommend. It's a beautiful spot. So many people come in and they say they love tea, and then they say their favorite tea is chamomile, which is great, but that's actually not tea, and they don't love tea. If you love tea, you drink the real tea. So, what is the real tea? That is what we are going to talk about. This is the tea. So, what is real tea? Real tea comes from the plant Camellia sinensis. So, if you think of like a camellia flower, those beautiful pink flowers, that is in the same family, but the Camellia sinensis is like a cousin. And so it doesn't grow flowers, but it's a leafy bush, a green leafy bush. And tea is native to the human, to the humid mist-draped Himalayan foothills where modern Yunnan, China, and northern Myanmar and Assam, India meet. Okay, so this is eastern China, right in the neighborhood where Myanmar, India, and China meet. This is a province of modern China known as Yunnan. Yunnan is the birthplace of tea, period. The ancient tea trees were often known as wild arbor trees, and some trees that are still alive are over 3,000 years old. There are still trees in Yunnan that are over 3,000 years old that are still living and they're still harvesting and drinking from. Like, what? Your fave could never. The tea plants, their roots penetrate deep into the mountain soil. And this is seen as a symbol of drawing wisdom and earth energy into the plant itself. So there are actually two primary species of Camellia sinensis. They're variations that both make tea. So the two most common teas are the Camellia sinensis variation sinensis. So it's like a pure strain. Think of this as strains of weed, if you will. But these are like kind of the two. This is almost like indica and sativa, if you will. It's not quite the same, but I'm just like, just to help you paint a picture. So there's basically the sinensis variety and there's the Assamica variety. The sinensis variety has smaller leaves. It is mostly cultivated in China and Japan in colder climates. It has a delicate floral and refined flavor. And then the Assamica variety has larger leaves. It's cultivated mostly in Yunnan and Assam, and it is better in the humid, more jungle-like climates. It has a bolder, malty flavor, and it's better for aging. Okay? So the biggest cultivars, and so this is like strains, okay? The biggest cultivars of teas are the Da Hong Pao, which is cultivated in Wu Yi, China, and this translates into big red robe. These are huge protected mother bushes and they have a minerally taste, especially because they grow in a high elevation, cliffy environment. So the areas that have higher elevation and more mountainous soil often have a more minerally flavor. So Da Hong Paos are often um, processed like an oolong or a red tea, which in the US we call a black tea. And I'll talk more about processing in a second. I'm just painting you some strong details of tea to really get you in the mindset. And then we're going to talk about the tea lore. Also, if you love tea, if you genuinely love caffeinated tea, as your friend, as someone who cares about you, stop drinking tea bags. Stop it. They are trash. They are fucking trash. They are trash. I highly recommend getting real tea from real tea sources. There's amazing tea sources that you can use, that you can access online now. I love Blue Willow. Blue Willow sources tea. And I honestly, they are not sponsoring me. Just Nico, who is literally one of my best friends in the whole world. They work at Blue Willow. I know the owner. And what's so amazing about Blue Willow is that they source tea from small farmers all around Asia, mostly China, Japan, and Taiwan. But they source their teas from local small farmers who use organic, they grow organic tea. They take so much care and pride in their tea, and you can get the real thing. And I'm telling you, it really changes the game when you are starting to brew real tea. Like it's unlike anything. It's amazing. My favorite tea is called Jinjinmei, and I think I've mentioned it 1,000 times on the pod, but Jinjinmei is incredible. It means golden eyebrow. It's a very, very delicate, gorgeous tea. It tastes like cherries and leather. Oh, it's so good. I was just drinking some to pregame for the pepisode. Okay, so we're kind of talking about the biggest cultivars. These are like the biggest strains, if you will. There's the Da Hong Pao I mentioned. There's the Longjing. If I had a nickel for every time a girl told me I had a Longjing. Longjing is from Hangzhou, China. This is the classic dragon well. This is a pan-fried green tea. It has a nutty flavor with sweet chestnut notes. This is a huge tea, especially in Shanghai. There's the classic Guanyin. This is from Fujian, China, which is a southern province of China. Guanyin is named after Kuan Yin. I did in the Kuan Yin episode talk about Guanyin, but we are going to touch back on it because it's so beautiful and it's so iconic. This is the classic, most commonly known oolong. And then there in Japan, they often produce, most famously, matcha, but there are also other Japanese green teas that are very famous and well known, such as genmaicha or gyokuro or satsukyu. And these are shade grown plants. Okay, so bear with me. These plants are often grown in open air, and then towards the end of their life, they build shade over them. They usually use bamboo poles, and then they have these like nets they use to shade the plants, and this helps them create a more delicate flavor, and this kind of gives them their umami flavor, if you will. And then in Yunnan, one of the most iconic and famous teas, maybe not in the Western world, but the most iconic tea of all time, which is pu'er. The trees in Yunnan are most commonly creators of pu'er tea, and a pu'er is a fermented and aged tea. It has an earthy, minerally dark consistency, incredible. And I know this was a lot of information, and I bet you if tea people are listening, they're like, you got this wrong. I am not a tea master. Still a novice. And when I talk to tea friends, they're like, you got everything wrong. So even though I researched all of this, I am probably getting everything wrong. So if you know more than me, email in, please. Essentially, I know this was a lot of information, but ultimately, the power of tea is this idea of chi. Chi is energy. It is breath. It is spirit. It is the harvestable energy that surrounds us. And that is the essence of tea. Tea has its own chi, its own energy from the earth, and that is part of why tea is so powerful. Um, we could get like I feel like maybe I overdid it on my notes, but I do really want to quickly touch on the classic types of tea, right? There's white tea, there's green tea, there's yellow tea, there's oolong, there's red tea, which usually in the United States we call black tea, and then there's pu'er. Now, one thing I think is really interesting is that the differences between these teas aren't actually it's really the processing. So essentially, the white tea has not been cooked at all. White tea is sun dried. Green tea is either steamed or like flash pan fried. And then yellow tea is cooked for a little longer. Oolong is usually charcoal smoked. And then black tea is cooked for longer. It's fully oxidized. And then pu'er is cooked for a long time and then, or I should say roasted and then aged. So one thing I think is really interesting that is a huge misconception about tea is that white tea actually has the most caffeine. Newsflash. It has the most caffeine because it hasn't been roasted at all. It's similar to coffee, how a lighter roast has more caffeine. But what's interesting is that I've heard from a lot of people who claim to be sensitive to caffeine. I've heard from some of those people that they can drink white tea with no problem. And so this is one of my personal hot takes. But I actually think when people say they're sensitive to caffeine, I think they actually might be more sensitive to terpenes. Every plant has terpenes. They're basically the things that give flavor, aroma, but they also our brains have terpene receptors. So we um respond to plants, vegetables when we ingest them. The terpenes affect how we feel after eating them. And I think that because darker teas have been roasted longer, they become more astringent, they become more powerful, and they can often like give you a headache. And I think that most people who think that they're sensitive to caffeine are actually more sensitive to the astringency of plants and not as sensitive to caffeine. Because let me tell you, when I was working at Blue Willow, the tea shop, there was probably at least one a day, a person who would come in and say they could not do caffeine, they were too sensitive to caffeine, except white tea. And I always thought it was so funny because it's like, babe, you're not sensitive to caffeine then. You're sensitive to something else. So my hot take is that it's the terpenes and the astringency of the tea. I just love nerding out over tea. Are you loving this? I hope so. So let's go down to the roots. Let's start from the beginning. In ancient China, tea was originally cultivated as just green tea. They would pluck the fresh leaves and they would sometimes eat sun dry them or just really quickly fire them or steam them to stop oxidization, basically to stop them from like decomposing. The idea was to preserve the natural color and fragrance and vitality of the living tea leaf. They believed that by preserving the vitality of each tea leaf was to preserve the chi or the life force in the tea. So in the early days, one Buddhist monk known as Shennong was like one of the OGs of the tea world, and he used unoxidized, grassy, and bright green teas. And he claimed that by drinking it, it was a purity and clarity of mind that was gained by drinking it. So in the ancient Chinese world, green tea was considered to be the purest expression of heaven's breath through earth's soil, suitable for meditation and temple rituals. So originally, tea was used by Buddhist monks and then eventually adopted by the royals. One really interesting tidbit I want to mention is that for a very long time, green tea was the only type of tea that was dr- consumed. And allegedly, the next tea that was discovered was Oolong, which allegedly was discovered by accident. And there are different versions to the story, but I'm going to tell you the ones that are the most iconic. Um, Interesting, Oolong is sometimes also known as Wulong, which means black dragon. But one version of how Oolong was created was a story about a farmer named Wu Liang. And he was picking tea leaves when he was distracted by a passing deer. He chased the deer and he left his harvested tea leaves overnight outside. By morning, the leaves had partially oxidized. They were starting to wilt and they were turning darker and fragrant. So he decided to roast them anyway, and he was astonished with the results. It had this beautiful honey-like smoky flavor. But I think the most iconic story, which is the most widely accepted, is in Fujian. There were tea merchants who had a huge stash of tea, like their year harvest that they had um, put in their storage. And nearby, there was a huge fire. And so they evacuated their land, and essentially all of their tea, which was stored, was smoked for hours and hours and hours. And so when they came back, their tea had turned brown and it had this smoky flavor, but as they tried it, they thought it was delicious. So the story goes, they created a market of interesting people in Oolong so that they could sell their tea. This was like all of their harvest for the year. They needed to sell this to make a profit. So they basically like started giving it samples to people and getting people interested. And of course, the um wealthier people were not interested because at this time like green tea was the only tea consumed, but they sold the oolong for a little cheaper and it got so popular and it's also so aromatic and hearty, and thus is the birth of oolong. Interestingly, um tea really became its own entity. In the modern world, we think about tea not so often, but in China, in ancient China, tea became its own industry and eventually its own currency. There was what was known as the tea horse ancient trade road. This began in around the 7th century during the Tang Ming dynasties. And during this time, they would trade pu'er, which are the fermented tea bricks. They would ferment them into like little bricks or little discs. And so they would send horses all around China and parts of Asia and trade tea. And eventually they started using tea as a currency because it was a standardized, weighable entity. Are you a fan of the podcast and want everyone to know? Well, guess what? We have merch live. There are sweatshirts, t-shirts, tank tops, water bottles, stickers, all kinds of things. There's also some other like random fun things of my personal art. But why not get a tote bag, a tumbler, and a hoodie to tell the world that you listen to the pod? Check it out. There's a link in the description of this video and a link in the description of my podcast and channel. Check me out, babe. And we're back, darlings. I really want it to sink in that tea was eventually used as a currency. That is so pivotal and so crazy. At this point in China, tea had become so popular that people were using tea in all kinds of medicinal uses. People were often using tea with braising their meat or cooking stew. They were literally cooking everything in their tea. And they were often using tea medicinally if somebody needed to ground themselves or was feeling sick. They were drinking tea all of the time to the point where now tea is considered a currency, especially because some people outside of larger establishments, outside of larger cities, tea would be more readily available than like perhaps like paper money. I think another thing that is so incredible about tea as a currency is that you could grow your own tea and make your own pu'er and you're printing money. Like it decentralizes money. It decentralizes the idea of that a king or a president is in charge of printing money that then you must obtain. Instead, it is it is possible for you to create your own money. And I think this is so this obviously is now a foreign concept in the modern world because everything has become privatized. And I think this is really magical and really important. And I think totally changes the landscape of what the world would be like when currency was actually considered medicinal, and calming and used for meditation. So essentially, just like giving you a loose timeline, tea, like I mentioned, started to be cultivated over 3,000 years ago. But specifically during the Shang and Zhou dynasties, which was roughly between 1500 and 256 BC. BC, okay, so this is like 3,000 years ago. Tea was mostly used medicinally as a medicinal herb, right? So they were like cooking it with things or drinking it as a medicine. But during the Han Dynasty, which is closer to the year zero, they would use tea as a tribute in imperial courts. And part of why kings were using it is because monks had started to use it so much during meditation and rituals within monasteries. And then eventually in the Tang Dynasty, tea culture was institutionalized as it spread along the Silk Road. So now everyone is starting to drink tea. And of course, I think an aspect of that is also, people wanting to enjoy the finer things. If the king swears by tea, then everyone wants to drink tea, right? And then eventually, um, the matcha was created once tea was brought over to Japan. Now tea is spreading all over the ancient world, and so things like matcha are being created in Japan. And in the Arab world, they're starting to drink teas. They really like the darker red teas. And then eventually into the Ming Dynasty, loose leaf teas are dominating. People are exporting them. The porcelain trade rises. And by the time we get into the 1600s, the Dutch discover tea in China and they start bringing tea over to Europe. By 1664, the first tea shipment arrives in England. And in the 1700s, Britain industrializes the tea import and taxation. In the 1800s, we have the Great Tea Race, the Opium Wars, and Indian tea plantations. So now Britain wants a piece of the pie. Britain is trying to compete with China. And just to paint a picture, China had already been cultivating tea for 3,000 years. That is crazy. 3,000 years, China's already been cultivating tea, and now England wants to get involved. They're also getting involved in the opium trade. And in the 1900s, this is when matcha starts spreading through the global economy. So that is kind of like my bare bones that I went through, but now I'm gonna go back and give some more details. That was like our framework. Really wanting you to understand that tea has really gained momentum, especially in the last 1,000 years, but this is a very ancient practice. So, like I mentioned, tea was first medicinal and it was a ritual drink, first with monks and then with emperors and then with nobles. So, like I mentioned, during the Tang Dynasty, this is around 1600 to 900, there was the Emperor Xuanzang, and he made tea an imperial tribute with elite regions, and he required people to send their finest leaves to the palace each spring. So, this was like his tax. He had a tea tax, he was taxing local regions to send him tea. However, he at this point decided that the only teas that were worth drinking were the Menjing province, the Wuyi province, and the Longji province. At this time, he considered tea artisans to be masters of heaven's court, and so their craft was seen as a divine offering. Eventually, into the Song dynasty, which was around 960 to 1279, tea competitions and ceremonies became courtly arts. Emperors would hold tea whisking tournaments where people would display skill, elegance, and refinement while brewing tea. The imperial court considered tea to be a symbol of moral virtue. To rule justly, one must cultivate serenity. So, by drinking tea, you were cultivating your own serenity, right? Because originally this had just been used for monks, and then now emperors are using it to create, to basically become more serene, calm, and this was seen as a divine quality, which I respect. And then, of course, in Japan, tea was eventually brought over by Chinese monks, and it was quickly adopted into Japanese culture, specifically by aristocracy and the samurai elite. In the 14th century, the shogun Ashikaga Yoshimitsu turned tea ceremony into an art of refinement and spiritual discipline. Later, Emperor Go-Daigo and the Zen masters of Kyoto used tea ceremonies for diplomacy and divine focus. And eventually, tea, specifically matcha, became a huge part of the Zen Buddhist practice. In the Edo period, the way of the tea, known as chanoyu, was used to display status, purity, and cultural sophistication. The royal families and the samurais would have tea gatherings to emphasize harmony, respect, and purity, ideals reflecting the divine order of self mastery. And so, even to this day, like now, matcha obviously is like a huge fad, but matcha is a part of Zen Buddhism or just Buddhism in general. The matcha is supposed to be created through a tea ceremony, which is a highly calculated tradition and ceremony about revering the seasons. And this is like another PSA, like real matcha is amazing. And of course, there's a lot of matcha shortages because matcha has become a real fad. But most places who make matcha lattes are not really making real matcha. So that is something to think about. If you like matcha, you should look into places near you where you can try real ceremonial grade matcha. Give it a try, babe. Also, tea spread into Korea. Tea was a sacred court ritual in Korea as well, specifically tied to Confucianism and Buddhist rites. The royal tea rite known as Daechaye, and I know I'm saying these things wrong, but this was a ceremony to honor ancestors, spirits, and the virtue of the king. Yeah, of course. You have to throw in the monarchy. But only the finest early spring leaves were offered during these ceremonies. It symbolized renewal and longevity of the dynasty. Korean kings saw tea as a bridge between heaven and state, a way to ensure cosmic harmony and legitimacy of rule. And like, I can't stress this enough. At this point in time, tea was seen as a ritual of serenity. They're drinking tea as a way to calm themselves. And what an idea. What an idea that royalty would be wanting to drink tea to be incredibly calm and collected. Like I really support this. Also, tea became a big part of Tibetan culture. In Tibet, they would make a tea known as butter tea, pu cha, and this became a royal staple in Tibetan palaces and monasteries. They would literally add butter in their tea. So often the Tibetan tea is kind of salty and milky. It symbolized wealth, hospitality, and divine protection. Monks would offer tea to the Dalai Lamas both as nourishment and as a spiritual offering, maintaining the body's warmth and mind's clarity in high altitudes. And then, of course, tea became super popular within the Arab world and Persia. Persian Shahs in the Safavid and Kahar eras. It's clear that I speak Spanish more than English sometimes because sometimes my English pronunciation is silly. But basically, during the 16th and 19th centuries within the Persian empires, tea was treated as a sign of culture and a symbol of divine favor and centered rule. So this was kind of like enjoyed by the elites, and it was, a symbol of serenity. Tea houses became extensions of the courts of the shahs. They were places of poetry, prophecy, and political intrigue. Sufi mystics sometimes shared tea with royalty, blurring the line between temporal power and spiritual insight. And again, this is why tea is so magical. Tea is a lot like smokers. Like when you're in a circle of people who really enjoy tea, usually you have some of the most interesting and philosophical conversations. Tea gets you high in a different way. Instead of being high like in the clouds, you're often grounded. It like pulls you into being grounded with the earth. And the people who enjoy tea are usually very mellow and very thoughtful people. And so this doesn't surprise me that in the Persian empires, tea was associated with philosophy and poetry and art. Like this is just, it's just chef's kiss. I'm telling you, babe, tea is it. And then, of course, tea reaches Europe, and the Europeans ruin everything. Tea reached the European courts in the 1600s, and it was first considered a medicinal curiosity, like a foreign ethnic medicine. But eventually, Queen Catherine of Braganza, she was a Portuguese queen who eventually married into the English bloodline. She brought her personal tea chest to London in 1662, and this made tea a symbol not only of refinement but of femininity. So kings and queens across Europe became fascinated with tea. It became a fad. So Louis the 15th, Louis the 14th and the Queen Victoria of England, they were became obsessed with tea. And at this point, they were adding sugar and milk because they just couldn't stand regular tea. So this kind of changed the palate. Originally, tea was being usually drank out of smaller vessels. In Asia, they were often drinking smaller cups of tea, so they were piping hot and then refilling them to have as many as they needed. Or now in Europe, people are having bigger cups of tea. They were adding sugar and milk, and this just kind of became a fad of the royals. And so this kind of became a part of royal identity and imperial propaganda within Europe. This, instead of representing connecting with tranquility and almost this like Buddhist mentality, this became a symbol of civilized taste and extravagance, right? Because to even have tea in Europe, it has to be shipped all the way from Asia. And if you didn't know at this point, for boats to reach Europe from Asia, they have to go around the entire continent of Africa, which was considered very dangerous. And if you don't know, that is part of why Christopher Columbus was given money from the King and Queen of Portugal to sail the opposite way. And he, quote unquote, discovered the Americas, which we know is not true. But he wanted a faster way to Asia, mostly for the pepper. No, I'm not even making this up. Black peppercorn became a huge commodity in Europe because you could preserve meat better through the winter. But of course, not just peppercorn, other spices and tea was highly desirable in England. They were looking for a faster route. So, for in the 16 and 1700s, to be drinking tea was a huge extravagance. So, that being said, that is a lot of academic info. about tea, but now I really want to get more into the magic, the magical lore, the folk tales, the beliefs. Like, this is why we came here. I know I get really into the history, but we know that we come here for the magic. But first, let's take a quick break. Hi, it's me, Annabelle, and if you've made it this far, I appreciate you so much. Please like and subscribe my channel, my page. I have so many kinds of content and I'm working on new kinds. You may be listening to me just through my podcast or through YouTube. You should check out my YouTube if you're not watching or listening to me there. I have meditation videos. I have yoga videos coming soon. I have my full length podcast. I'm doing short episodes. I'm doing shorts, and soon I'm going to be having listener episodes. So, like, subscribe. Thanks, babe. Love you. All right, darling. Let's get into the meat and potatoes. So, one one thing that I found so fascinating, and I just recently learned this, is that in China, there is what is called tea spirits. They are known as the cha xian. And so cha is the word for tea in both China and Japan, cha. And that's kind of where chai comes from. The word chai just means tea. Fun fact. Okay. So the tea immortals, the cha xian, appear as mist figures guiding those with pure hearts. Like, stop. So the tea immortals, the Chaqian, are a big part of Taoist folklore. They are celestial immortals who dwell in mist around the ancient tea mountains. They appear as elderly sages, as mist maidens, or luminous beings carrying jade cups. Like me. Literally me. Kill me. This is amazing. Their role is to teach humans how to prepare and honor tea, whispering brewing techniques and meditative wisdom in dreams. Like, literally sign me up. It is said that when a tea master brews with full presence, the steam becomes a bridge, and the cha xian, descend to share in the tea ceremony. Uh, I'm gonna cry. This is literally my dream. This is why we need to get back into respecting the earth and animals, because we can literally be talking to plants. Everything is sentient, everything is conscious. And our ancestors knew this, and we've forgotten through fucking colonization. Fucking idiots. Like, I feel like I say this every episode, but I'm going to say it again. Colonization has fried our fucking brains because every single thing has consciousness. Everything is sentient. Fight me on it. Fight me. It's so real. And there's a reason why every ancient culture talks about mountain spirits and river spirits and sky spirits. Everything is sentient. And they're literally talking to tea spirits when they're brewing tea. They're making a broth from plants and talking to the spirit of that plant. And this is why plant medicine is so important. I love plants, and I really do think I've talked to plants. I literally learned how to talk to plants before I learned how to talk to humans. Shout out to my parents who were neglectful. And I'm so grateful my parents neglected me as a toddler because it gave me the opportunity to spend more time in the garden. I spent more time around plants than humans when I was a very young child. And so I learned how to talk to plants. You don't need language. It's all telepathic. They all have their own powers. This is real life, you guys. This is real life. And this is why I love tea. Tea is a really powerful plant, and it's so yin. I think we associate, because of colonization, we associate power with might. We associate power with like strength, but tea is so different. It's like so contemplative and grounded and like eternal. It's magical. Oh, I'm freaking out. I'm just pissed. I really want us to get back to this. And that really is my dream for humanity. I want us to get back to being centered in our body so that we can interact with nature. Like, we live on a paradise planet. We can talk to the plants and animals, and they all have magical powers. We have magical powers. Like, we could literally be having the time of our lives and talking to plants and learning ancient wisdom from them and writing poetry and philosophizing and having a fucking the time of our lives. Like, are you fucking dumb? I'm getting heated. It's time. I should probably have a sip of tea. I should have brought my tea set. It just, my desk isn't that big. My tea set is downstairs. But it's time to take a sip of tea, and carry on. So let's talk about the seven tea immortals from Wu Yi. So according to Taoist legends, they have seven immortal monks who meditated in the cliffs of the Wu Yi mountains, surviving only on tea leaves and dew. Morning dew and tea leaves. I think this has to be me from my past life. It has to be. Are you kidding me? Seven immortal monks who meditated in the cliffs of Wu Yi? Shut up. This is fucking cool. After years of practice, their bodies became light and fragrant, and it said that they evaporated into tea mist. So instead of like dying, they just evaporated into tea mist. Their spirits bless all tea grown in the Wu Yi province. Hence, why teas like Da Hong Pao are believed to carry the qi of immortality and devotion. I'm literally gonna fucking cry. Are you kidding me, you guys? If you've never had Da Hong Pao, I highly recommend. Da Hong Pao is hella fucking good. Super fucking good. I love Da Hong Pao. God, I just like this is making me tear up. Like how I have faith in humanity because this is our ancestors. Like all of us are not that different. Human history, even through all the war, even through all the violence, like we come from people who are so mad chill. People who are fucking talking to plants and animals and meditating. Like, fuck yes, dude. If this is a PSA, do less, meditate more. I think we should all try to be more like these monks who meditated and lived off of morning dew and tea leaves. Like, I think try to be a little bit more like that guy. You know what I mean? So, another classic tea spirit is known as the spirit of Pu'er, the mountain ancestor. And so, like I mentioned, Pu'er is the fermented tea from the Yunnan province. And that's what my little I Ching pot is about. This is my little baby boy. I should name him. What should I name him? Well, I want to name him after one of the tea spirits. Well, let's think about it. But I want to name my little tea boy after the tea spirit because come on, look at this baby. If you're not watching my YouTube, you should really check it out because we're really getting in there. I'm really trying to take the podcast more seriously. I at this point I'm doing the podcast for free, but my dream is to make this my full-time job. So if you're listening and you like the podcast, just by liking the podcast, commenting, it really helps my algorithm. If you want to subscribe or donate to the podcast, you can check out my Patreon, which at this point is very minimal, but just subscribing to my Patreon or my podcast really helps. I appreciate you. But check out my YouTube. You can look at my really cute teapot, which I'm looking for names for, and he's a very nice boy. And this is designed for Puer, okay? So, in Yunnan, tea harvesters tell of an ancient forest guardian spirit who lives in the oldest pu'er trees, sometimes called Cha Zu, ancestor of tea. Maybe that's what I should name my little baby, Cha Zu. That is so cute. They would leave offerings of rice wine and incense for Cha Zu before harvesting the tea. Ugh, shut up. I'm going to cry. If the spirit of Chazu was displeased through either greed or disrespect, it is believed that he would cause storms, or that the tea would taste particularly bitter. If he was pleased, the tea would become sweet after being bitter, symbolizing the transformation through humility and kindness. Oh my God. Of course, another famous tea immortal is Guanyin, the iron goddess of mercy. Guanyin is often said to embody the divine feminine aspect of tea itself, gentle, compassionate, and awakening. When tea is poured with devotion, Guanyin's essence is believed to flow through the steam, blessing the drinker with empathy, patience, and inner calm. This is so fucking nice. Some other tea immortals are the tea fairy sisters. These sisters are a part of Yunnan and Sichuan folklore. These are two luminous sisters descended from heaven to teach humans how to cultivate tea and balance the energies of yin and yang in each cup. Stop. When greedy warlords tried to capture these little tea fairies, they would vanish into the mist, transforming into twin tea trees that still grow side by side. Stop. Local women would make offerings to these tea trees before harvest, asking for beauty, fertility, and spiritual insight. Oh my God. There's also the tea spirit known as Hu Cha, the fox spirit. There's a myth blending the fox and the tea spirit traditions. A fox who was seeking redemption meditated for 100 years under a tea tree. When the fox achieved enlightenment, she merged with the roots of the tea tree and became a guardian of the tea's sacred balance. The sensual and serene, the wild and wise fox spirit. Oh my God. This is so sweet, you guys. Like, what if we all just stopped funding war and exploitation and we all just started meditating for hundreds of years under tea trees and became tea spirits? This is so nice. Like, this is making me emotional. I just love kindness. I love kindness. I just wish everyone was a little nice tea spirit. Okay, another famous tea spirit is the jade rabbit. In the Taoist cosmology, the jade rabbit lives on the moon and grinds herbs. She's an herbalist and she's a jade rabbit. One of the herbs that she would cultivate was a celestial tea, and she would make this into the elixir of immortality. The steam rising from the teacups of the jade rabbit was said to connect to the moon's reflection, allowing mortals to sip a drop of the same elixir through contemplation. So basically, they believed that specifically at night, the steam of tea that was sitting out at night would connect you to the moon's reflection and absorb the power of the jade rabbit and the elixir of immortality. So this is your sign. Start making tea at night and setting it outside under the moon to have your elixir of immortality. And then there is the dream servant, which is another tea spirit. Some old tea masters wrote of what was called the tea dream servant, who's literally Nico. I know the tea dream servant. A gentle spirit, often described as feminine, who visits dreamers during deep meditation or illness. The, the dream servant would offer a cup of warm tea that glows with a light. When accepted, the dreamer would awaken fully healed or inspired. Are you kidding me? I need a visit from the tea servant. I am the dream servant of tea. I've been so tired recently, and I think there is a huge energetic shift happening on planet Earth right now, but I'm gonna need a visit from the tea dream servant. How magical! I'm having the time of my life. Okay, so now I want to tell you some iconic myths from the tea world. There are so many little tea myths. They're like little short fairy tales, and they're so cute. So I hand selected some of my favorite, some of the most iconic, and I just I just think they're so precious, and I'm feeling so inspired right now. Sometimes life can feel stressful, especially money. Like I get really stressed about money. I get stressful about having to navigate through this world where there seems to be so many rules and red tape and literal violence against life. But I'm reminded that throughout history, there's always been kind people who are drinking tea, and that's who I want to be. I just want to be a kind tea boy. So, our first legend that we will tell is the legend of Blue Willow. And of course, I had to start with Blue Willow because I keep mentioning the Blue Willow tea shop, and so now you know why it's called Blue Willow. It's a famous tea legend. There are multiple versions, and again, I say this every episode. Most stories that we know started as oral tradition stories. And oral traditions would have multiple versions. People in different regions would have different stories, or a storyteller would put their own spin. So when we write stories down, we often eliminate the vast diversity of that story and its legacy throughout region and family. So the story I'm telling is a classic telling, um, but just to be clear, it used to be an oral tradition. Also, the story has become very popular within the British world. So a lot of British tea china will have illustrations of this story. So it's kind of become conflated as it's taking on a new life in Britain. However, the story goes, in ancient China, there lived a wealthy mandarin who had a beautiful daughter named Kung Shi. Kung Shi was promised to a powerful duke, a political match, not a love match, classic. But she fell in love with Chang, her father's humble secretary, a poetic and gentle scholar. See, we love an artsy lover boy. They met secretly in the Mandarin's flowering willow garden, exchanging poems and sipping tea by a small pavilion overlooking a river bridge. Ah, we love a secret romance that's so hot. When the father discovered the love affair, enraged and fearing disgrace, he imprisoned Kung Shi in her chambers and banished Chang. No! Darn it! The wedding day approached. But the night before the ceremony, Kung Shi escaped with Chang. Yes, I'm loving this. They fled across the arched willow bridge, helped by sympathetic servants, carrying jewels meant as dowry, not for wealth, but to build a humble life together in exile. Oh my God. They reached a distant island tea house, and they lived in peace, pouring tea for travelers and writing long verses to the moon. Oh my God. But Kung Shi's dad eventually tracked them down with soldiers. The lovers refused to return. Their tea house was burned to the ground. They died in the flames, holding each other. The gods were moved by the lovers' devotion, and they transformed them into two white doves, forever flying above the willow gardens, guardians of eternal love. So interestingly, this is often called the story of Blue Willow, but a big reason why is because a lot of porcelain in China was painted in blue paint. So these willow trees were often painted in blue. So the symbol of the blue willow became a huge iconic symbol in the tea world. But technically, it is just about regular willow trees and white doves. This is better than Romeo and Juliet. Hot take. I think this is a much more interesting theme, much more dynamic, much more beautiful, dying in flames, transformed into birds, choosing art, love, philosophy, and tea over money and political match. Like, I just love this. I think this is beautiful, and I'm fully on board. Let's take a quick break. Esoterica and Nonsense wants to hear from you. We have listener episodes coming, and I want to tell your story. Maybe you've had a really freaky dream. Maybe you had some crazy religious experience. Maybe you grew up in a cult. Maybe you actually just have some random stories that your grandma used to tell you growing up. Maybe you just want to share something random with me. The floodgates are open. Please email in your story at esotericaandnonsense@gmail.com. Any story that comes to your mind, I want to hear it, even if you just want to say hi. We love that. We are all for it. And get ready for some listener episodes coming soon. All right. And we're back, darling. Next, we have the story of Shennong. Shennong is an iconic figure of the tea legends, and he is considered one of the ancient farmers who discovered tea, allegedly. So, long before temples rose, before scrolls were inked, and dynasties carved their names into jade tablets, there walked a man named Shennong, the divine farmer. Half man, half god, father of medicine, he roamed the mountains, tasting every herb, cataloging the plants that could heal and those that could kill. One afternoon he boiled mountain spring water beneath a wild, glossy leafed tree. A breeze stirred, and a single leaf drifted into his pot, like a green feather falling from heaven. The water turned pale gold, fragrant, alive. He drank. The world sharpened. His breath slowed. His mind opened like early spring plum blossoms. And Shennong whispered, "This leaf lifts the fog from the human heart." Thus, tea was born, not as a drink, but as a spirit plant broth, to awaken the mind, purify the body, and prepare the soul for wisdom. Okay, so that is like a classic Chinese lore. But there is another interesting lore that comes from the Zen Buddhist legend, and this is about Bodhidharma, who was a Buddhist monk. And this is a story about the creation of tea from the Zen Buddhist tradition. And this one is really silly, and I love it. So, they say the founder of Zen, Bodhidharma, once vowed to meditate facing a cave wall for 9 full years. No movement, no sleep, no drifting from awareness. But the body is mortal and the mind can waver. So after 7 long years, his eyes closed just once. When he woke, he was horrified by his lapse. He sliced off his own eyelids and cast them to the ground so that he could never close his eyes again. This is ridiculous and psychotic, if you ask me. Where his eyelids fell, two tea plants sprouted. This is crazy. The plants were dark green and radiant, buzzing with life. Monks found the tea leaves and brewed them, and they felt clarity pierce like moonlight. This is why they say that tea banishes sleep, and why tea is the guardian plant of meditation. I'm sorry, that is cuckoo. So yeah, I mean, according to Zen Buddhism, tea grew from the discarded eyelids of the OG. That's just like so not Zen though. Like, how is that Zen? You're meditating and then you're gonna slice your eyelids off? Like, that's so aggro. I just feel like that, I feel like it's just not matching up. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, I feel like a Zen Buddhist, this is my hot take, but I feel like a Zen Buddhist would be detached, right? Like, I feel like they'd be like, I forgive myself for falling asleep after 7 fucking years. Like, this is a little bit extreme. This is not giving yin energy. You know what I'm saying? It's a little bit cuckoo bird. Okay, so now we are going to tell the story of Guanyin. So um I have told a version of this story in my Guanyin episode, but I am just going to tell it again. So, As the legend goes, in the Fujian province lived a poor farmer named Wei Yin. He passed a neglected temple one day as he walked through the woods. Though he had very little, one day he stopped to sweep the leaves out of the temple and to light incense in honor of the deity that he discovered was, in fact, Guanyin. One night, Guanyin appeared in his dream, her robes flowing like silver water. Behind the mountain, she said, lies a treasure. Share it, and fortune will bloom for all. So he awoke in the morning, heart pounding, and he walked to the cave that she had showed him in his dream, and found a single tea shoot. He planted it and tended to it, and shared cuttings with neighbors. The tea was miraculous, fragrant like an orchid, smooth like silk, bright as temple bells at dawn. This tea became known as Tai Guanyin, the iron goddess Oolong. I just, this one really gets me. Like, I love that all of these stories are so, like, magical and esoteric. The fact that he was given tea as a gift from Guanyin in a dream, like, just your fave could never. Next up, we have the story of Dragonwell, the Longjing tea. In Hangzhou, there was a village plagued by drought. Fields yellowed, children weakened, prayers hung unanswered in the air. A monk meditated beside an ancient well, and in stillness he felt a pulse in the earth, a heartbeat of a sleeping dragon beneath. He rang temple bells and he chanted. The well stirred. The well stirred. Mist rose like breath from a great creature. Rain clouds gather. The dragon awoke, sending rain over the parched land. From that day forward, the spring was called Dragonwell, and the tea grown with its waters held the taste of rain, stone, and blessings. The Longjing tea then became a symbol of rain after hardship, divine protection, and the luck of the dragon. Also, of course, dragons are associated with nobility, so it also not only became associated with luck, but with nobility. Oh my God. These stories make me want to cry. Okay, a few more stories. I could just tell stories forever. This is a story of the monkey-picked tea from the Wu Yi Mountains. High in the misty cliffs of Wu Yi, tea plants grew where no human could climb. So villagers trained clever golden monkeys to fetch tender buds from impossible heights. These teas tasted wild, untamed, and filled with mountain chi. And so the legend began that monkeys with ancient souls picked sacred tea for enlightened seekers. The truth was that humans picked them, but the myth endured because tea teaches reverence for the heights which we cannot reach alone. I mean, honestly, they could have actually trained monkeys to pick these. I'm not convinced that this is just a legend. You can, I mean, if you give them food, they will do what you want. Also, shout out to Golden Monkey. Golden Monkey is a delicious tea that I highly recommend. We love Golden Monkey. And next up, we have the story of the heavenly dew. And this is a story about the birth of matcha in the Zen tradition. In the 12th century, the monk Asai returned from China with powdered tea and sacred truths. He offered this tea to samurai generals to calm their minds, to monks to deepen their meditation, and to the emperor to strengthen his body. These were shade grown, stone milled tea leaves that were whisked like a prayer. These stories are so sweet. I feel like I could do this forever. Let's have a few more honorable mentions. We wouldn't be able to do a tea episode without talking about the iconic Rikyū. Rikyū is considered to be the creator of the Japanese tea ceremony, the OG tea master. And the story goes, long ago, in the time of warriors and emperors, there lived a quiet man named Rikyū who could hear the language of tea. He served tea not as a show of wealth, but as a mirror of the soul. While others built grand halls for their guests, Rikyū built a hut so small that even a lord had to bow to enter. Inside there was nothing, only a bamboo ladle, a clay bowl, and silence. When his student asked, "Master, why is there no decoration?" Rikyū smiled and said, "Because the moment you sit, you become the decoration." Each sound, the scoop of water, the whisk of matcha, the breath between sips, was a heartbeat to the ceremony. One evening, when the great warlord Hideyoshi came to test him, Rikyū served a single bowl of tea beneath falling cherry petals. No grandeur, no extra show, only the scent of spring and impermanence. The warlord wept. For that simple cup, he saw the whole world, birth, beauty, passing, and simplicity. And from that night onward, the way of tea became the way of peace, a ceremony of humility, emptiness, and divine presence. They say that when Rikyu's spirit left his body, the sound of his kettle still whispered through the ages and through the ceremony that is still carried on to this day. These stories are so sweet, I could cry. Okay, just humor me. I just have two more stories. These are short but sweet. This is known as the Moroccan mint tea blessing. In Morocco, they say that tea came from Allah's garden, and mint was breathed into the world by angels who wept for humankind's suffering. To serve tea is to honor the life of another, to honor peace itself, and to honor the sacred sweetness in the bitter life. So they basically believe that Allah's garden grew mint. Like this is just so sweet. Okay, and now we have the iconic tea jinn, the jinn of tea, the tea genie from the Persian folk tales. It was said that nomads along the Silk Road left cups of tea at mountain crossings for jinn and ancestral spirits. They believed the steam beckoned friendly spirits and kept travelers safe from mischief. Mountain spirits love warmth and tea offerings to the unseen guests of the wilderness. You know, this actually reminds me of a past life regression I did once for myself. Um, and in this past life, I was like a merchant on the Silk Road, and I was somewhere in the mountains, perhaps in China or in the Himalayas, I'm not sure, but I basically it was snowing and I had like a cart that was being pulled by I think like yaks or horses, I'm not sure. But I had pulled my cart over and there was a bunch of other merchants and we were all gathered around a fire drinking tea. And not all of us spoke the same language, but we were all like laughing. And there was just this moment internally that I had where I just thought, like, I love traveling. Like, I love, like, there was no place I'd rather be than just be around this fire with all of these interesting strangers. And it was like, yeah, I was a merchant, not because I loved the life of a merchant, not because I like to sell things, but because I love to be a traveler. And I love to be sharing tea with all of these interesting strangers. And it reminds me of one of Uncle Iroh's amazing quotes from Avatar: The Last Airbender. And when there's an episode where he drinks tea with Toph and hears her life story. And he says, one of life's greatest pleasures is to share tea with an interesting stranger. And it's so true. It is just so true. Well, my dear friends, I could talk about tea forever, but I will just leave you with this idea. If 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 anything is to be embedded in your sweet little mind, I just want you to remember that every single plant on this earth has a legacy in human history, and that majority of plants have a beautiful friendship with humanity, and obviously specifically tea. Tea now has become this huge commodity that's being exploited, and people are just using these shitty tea bags. Like, just so you know, tea bags is the equivalent of shake. Like, I don't know if you're into weed, but like the shitty shake, like the bottom of the bag, all those crumbles, like that's what tea bags are. They're just like a mixture of overcooked tea that they just get all the crumbles from and they throw them in tea bags and sell you it. It's trash. Like, real fresh tea is so magical. And all of us have forgotten that we can talk to plants and we can talk to animals. And this is just your reminder that when you drink tea, you're drinking the breath of mountains. You are drinking the rain. You are drinking the tangled ancient roots, the dreams of the ancients, the tears of lovers. Tea is the earth remembering itself. Tea is you remembering who you really are. You are an interdimensional being that comes from earth. Your body is of earth. Your soul is from the stars. And when you drink tea, you bridge the gap between realms. This is your sign. Start drinking tea. Thank you so much for listening. I appreciate you so much. Please subscribe to my podcast, comment, do your thing. I really appreciate you. I wish you nothing but the best. We need more kind human beings like you. Catch you next time, babe.